few days from now, we will post this to our website for review, so that way you can watch this back if you wanted to hear my voice again or see what else we were doing. We're just going to let a few more people enter. My colleague Jessica Wilcox will be letting people into the lobby, and I'm going to get started in just a moment. Everyone is in listen-only mode right now. We will be unmuting people during the Q&A session at the end, but for now, if you have a question, you can use the chat. I'll also apologize up front if I seem a little short of breath. As you may know, the air quality in New Hampshire right now is at an advisory. We have quite a bit of particulate matter from the wildfires up north. Plus, it's just end of June pollen. It's a good combination to make it a little harder to get a full lungful. So again, I apologize if I sound a little out of breath today. But thank you for attending on this Friday morning before a holiday weekend. If you are watching this back on the recording, thank you for giving us your time. I'm hoping that this is a good resource for you. My name is Ricky DeSillo. I'm the Emissions Reduction and Electric Vehicle Specialist here in the Mobile Sources section of the Air Resources Division of the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Today, I'm going to go over the Granite State Clean Fleets Program, as well as a little bit about the New Hampshire Clean Diesel Grant Program. I want to say up front, official details of these programs can be found in their respective requests for proposals on their web pages. If I say something that's contradicting what's in the RFPs take precedence. And like I already said, we'll have some time at the end of this webinar for Q&A. Use the chat function, enter questions now. We can get to them later. And otherwise, let's get straight to it. So, in October of 2017, New Hampshire received an allocation of the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust Funds. New Hampshire's share was approximately $31 million. The New Hampshire Volkswagen Beneficiary Mitigation Plan allocated at least 30% of these funds to go towards local government projects. The purpose of the VW Trust is to reduce the harmful effects of vehicle emissions. Older diesel units emit greater amounts of oxides of nitrogen, which we call NOx, and fine particulate matter, which we call PM2.5, which can be harmful to human health and can contribute to medical conditions such as asthma, lung cancer, and more. On the other hand, electric vehicles do not produce any tailpipe emissions. Oh, one moment, let me just fix there we go. Even when factoring in the emissions associated with generating and distributing the electricity to run an electric vehicle, EVs still contribute far less air pollution than their internal combustion engine counterparts. Additionally, advancements in fuel efficiency and emission control technology, like diesel particulate filters, for instance, mean new diesels can be cost-effective solutions to reducing emissions as well. So that's the intent of the program. Let's get into the basics. So this program has $10 million available. The program is available to municipalities, school districts, and local transit agencies. This program, however, is not available to private businesses who provide services to eligible applicants. So for instance, a school bus company providing bus services for an eligible New Hampshire school district is not eligible for these funds. The program will fund projects that replace trucks, buses, and other certain niche equipment. And I don't see niche to mean that the other options aren't viable, just that over the years of all of our other programs, they're just generally not as common as buses and trucks, looking back over those years. But those are just as important as everything else. I'll also mention here that if I use the word units during this presentation, I'm talking about vehicles and equipment in general. So like buses and trucks, those are both kinds of units, for instance. The program can also fund the installation of marine shore power. The program is open now at time of recording, and all proposals are due no later than October 13th, 2023. So hopefully that should allow you sufficient time to work out your fleet needs and submit a proposal. So let's get into project options. There are 5 main categories of projects eligible under this program. You can replace an eligible diesel unit with a new diesel unit. For instance, if you have a plow truck or dump truck that needs to be replaced, you could scrap the old plow truck and get a new one. You can replace an eligible diesel unit with an all-electric model. For instance, if you wanted to purchase an electric school bus, you could scrap an old school bus and replace it with a battery electric one. You can repower an eligible diesel unit by scrapping its old engine and installing a new diesel engine. This will let you keep the chassis or the hull intact and just change out the engine. We usually see this option taken up by boats, but it's available for any eligible unit. You can similarly replace an eligible diesel unit's engine with an all-electric powertrain. And finally, you can install shore power plug-ins for ocean-going vessels, so they can plug in while at port rather than idling their engines to use their electronics. These shore power pedestals don't involve scrapping or replacing a particular unit, so if you're thinking of doing one of these projects, just note some of the rules I'll present today won't necessarily apply to this kind of project. So generally, you can replace a diesel or its engine with a new diesel or with an electric, or you can install marine shore power. So let's talk about what sort of diesel units are eligible for these replacements. Eligible highway vehicles include buses of weight class 4 and higher, as long as they are engine model year 2009 or older. And here bus means school bus, shuttle buses, and transit buses. Also eligible are class 4 and higher trucks, so long as their engine model year is between 1992 and 2009. I will point out here, street sweepers count as trucks in this case, so they follow these restrictions. Now let's talk about those, what I would call niche equipment options. Again, these are very much eligible, but this is a little bit less popular is all the only reason that we put them over here. This would include freight switcher locomotives, which are pre-tier 4 and which operate at least 1,000 hours per year. Ferries and tugboats that are pre-tier 3 are also eligible. Airport ground support equipment that is tier 0 through tier 2 and is either uncertified or is certified to at least 3 grams per brake horsepower hour is eligible. And forklifts and port cargo handling equipment, which are greater than 8,000 pound lift capacity, are eligible. So just to highlight a few things, freight switchers are the only units under this program which have a minimum usage requirement. If you've ever looked at our programs for like EPA's DERA program, including the New Hampshire Clean Diesel Grant Program, you might remember that all the units have a minimum usage requirement under DERA, but that's only the case for freight switchers under the Granite State Clean Fleets Program. Another interesting exception is that for the category of forklifts and port cargo handling equipment, there's no age requirement. So the other equipment types have like a tier requirement, which is effectively an age requirement. And the buses and trucks have a year for their engine model. That doesn't apply for forklifts and cargo equipment. Outside of that though, generally, when you're thinking about what units in your fleet might fit this grant, you should be thinking about older units. So that is what is eligible for vehicles and equipment. Now let's talk about funding these projects. So all projects under this grant will require the recipient to provide some minimum amount of cost share to the eligible project costs. I say eligible project costs because there are some project costs that the grant will not cover, which the recipient will have to cover, but will not count towards contributing to the project cost share. For eligible project costs, the split is like this. For fully electric projects, as in projects replacing units with battery or grid-powered units like an electric school bus project, the grant will cover 95%. For installing marine shore power, the grant will cover 90%. And for replacing a diesel project with like a new diesel, like for instance, replacing a plow truck with a new diesel plow truck, the grant will cover 80%. The rest is up to the recipient. If the grant recipient, which could be you, has a project partner in mind, the partner can cover or help cover the cost share too. That's fine. And so this leads me nicely into talking about what is and what isn't eligible to be covered under this grant. So project costs are divided into ineligible and eligible project costs. We're actually going to start with ineligible because it's actually a little bit shorter. So on the right here in this first column, any costs incurred before the contract is approved by the governor and executive council are ineligible for reimbursement. So that means that even if New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services likes your project, you're not approved to spend money until after G&C approves the grant. We'll talk about the timeline in a couple slides. Other ineligible project costs include the cost of registering the vehicle, if you need to, cost of personnel and administration, the cost to scrap the unit is ineligible. If you need to pay to have it hauled to a junkyard, then you need to pay someone else to actually do the scrappage. But I'll note that if you once the thing is scrapped, you're welcome to sell the salvage or the scrap, and you can use that money to pay for the project costs or whatever you want, really. Any unnecessary components for making the unit do its job are not eligible, and operation and maintenance are not eligible. On the other hand, eligible project costs include the cost of the replacement unit and any necessary unit components. So that means if you were replacing, for instance, a plow truck, the cost of the new plow blades would be eligible because you need them for the truck to do its job. If the old plow truck had a sander to spread sand and salt during snowstorms, that's necessary for the new one, so that's part of the necessary components. If you're doing an electrification project, the cost can also include the cost of the charger and all necessary infrastructure to make sure that EV can work. Yes, that can include transformers, pads, groundwork, installation, whatever. Not whatever, more. We also will accept solar panels and batteries as eligible project costs if they help power the EV by supplementing the grid and reducing demand, which can be a great solution to reducing the cost of electricity to your EV. So when you look at the grant cost share split of 80, 20, 95, 5, right? So we look back here, we said 80, 20, 95, 5. This is only 95% of what's on this left-hand column here. The stuff in the right-hand column is entirely on the grantee. The stuff on the left is where we do the 80, 20, 90, 10, 95, 5, whatever it is. So if you're doing an electric school bus grant, the grant can cover 95% of everything in this left-hand column. You'd have to cover at least 5% of everything in the left-hand column plus everything in the right-hand column. And you don't need to, but you're actually allowed to overmatch if you think that would make your project more competitive. But again, you don't have to do that. Now, that brings me to how we will decide which projects to fund. So this is a competitive program. We will take all eligible proposals and score them to determine which projects to fund. The scoring criteria are proposal, clarity, and project readiness. Proposal is thoroughly developed, is complete, and directly addresses questions being asked. Project seems feasible within time frame and budget. Reductions of oxides of nitrogen, fine particulate matter, and carbon dioxide. Environmental justice. Project impacts and/or engages the population of an area disproportionately affected by diesel emissions and/or an area of environmental justice concern. And additional benefits. Project provides benefits in addition to air quality, such as project showcases, scalability, bidirectional charging capabilities, water quality, noise reduction, collaboration or cooperation with other service providers, and workforce development. Note that we don't need you to write a novel on your application. We just need to know why your project deserves points in these categories. Also, we are offering bonus points for projects which are powered exclusively by electricity and for projects which incorporate renewable energy technology such as solar, hydro, and wind. So that's how we'll score and determine which projects to move forward with. Now we're going to zoom out and talk about the process overall and sort of the timeline of how this all works. All right, so big picture of how this whole process goes. We are currently in the application phase. During the application phase, prospective applicants should be determining fleet needs. If you're looking for an electrification project, you should approach your utility to determine what electrical upgrades will be necessary. You can then submit your project proposals with all the required attachments no later than October 13th, 2023. I recommend submitting earlier in case there are any technical problems. I'm going to say that again, submit earlier. During the selection phase, we will be asking applicants clarifying questions as needed, and we will be scoring the projects. Now, if a project is selected, we will send a list of documents that we need the selectee to either provide or fill out and return to us. Once we have everything, we submit the grant packet for review. Once it clears review, it goes to New Hampshire Governor and Executive Council. If they approve the grant, we will send you a notice to proceed, which serves to officially inform you that your project may begin, which moves us into the project phase. In the project phase, you can do all the project work, make your purchases, order your units, break ground, do site work, install infrastructure, etc. Once you have the new unit ready for service, you have 30 days before you need to scrap the old one. Give us 2 weeks notice in case we want to come out and witness the scrappage. If we don't, you'll just need to send us some photos and some very simple documentation. Throughout the project phase, you can submit requests for reimbursements as necessary. We usually encourage applicants to request reimbursement after the project's complete. But if you have a very large project like replacing a dozen buses or installing EV infrastructure and replacing buses, we might expect that project to take a longer time, and we would understand if you wanted reimbursement for more than one phase of the project. Once the project is complete, you'll have some reporting requirements as specified in the individual grant agreements. We're looking to collect some data on the unit's performance, activity, challenges and surprises you face, stuff like that. Of course, applying for the program doesn't guarantee you'll be approved or even selected, but it does all start with an application. So now let's talk about what you actually need to put together for the grant proposal. All right, here's what you need to apply. There's an eligibility checklist in the proposal form, which helps you determine if your project is eligible and also will have you attest to that eligibility. Then we need contact info for you, any partners, and if the utilities are involved, their contact info too. We need to know who you spoke to. There are some brief project narrative sections where you will explain your project and why it should be funded. We'll need some photos of the unit that's up for replacement, and if it's applicable, the site of any electrical infrastructure will want photos of that too. We've created a fairly straightforward Excel sheet for you to give us some basic info about the units you'd like to replace, and a cost proposal sheet, which is like an itemized budget. And finally, for EV projects, a utility assessment form is required. So let's actually take a moment and I will actually show you how to get to all of this. So bear with me as we navigate the wonders of doing two things on presentation at once. And it didn't work. That's okay. Because it needs to be over here. All right. So if you go to the DES website and you go to Business and Community, under that tab, you'll see Loans and Grants. You scroll down to near the bottom, you'll see Volkswagen Mitigation Trust, which again is the source of these funds. And here you'll have some information about the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. At the bottom, there's some links to more documents, outside documents. It's a good point to point out if there's anything you're not sure about, if it qualifies or not. Even whatever we say in the RFP, it still also has to qualify for the VW trust. So if there's something that we say you can't do, or we say you can do, it still has to also be there too. But don't worry too much about that. Up here near the top, funding opportunity, Granite State Clean Fleets. This is also where we're going to post any updates. If there's any small things, we'll put all the documentation here, including that was the link to the webinar right here. Once this webinar is available, we'll post this here for you to be able to review it. But you can click this to see the request for proposals, which looks like this. This details all of these rules and more. And at the bottom of that, but also as its own separate document here, you can get to the proposal form. Just give it a moment to load. You'll get to a web page that looks like this, and you can click download mail-in form right here. We'll open that up right here so you can see it. Here we have our brief eligibility checklist. Please make sure to check the 3 boxes here. The contact information we require. Some places for you to include some project narrative information. And instructions on what attachments we are asking for. We go back to our website. We can pull up as well. We can also pull up the fleet descriptions and cost proposal worksheets. We'll start with whichever one this one was. The cost proposal worksheet has some brief instructions here, which I'll actually just kind of explain while we're here all together. There's a budget worksheet where you will fill out module 1, your fleet purchase costs, so the actual units. You'll click this drop down, pick which kind of thing it is. If it's not on this list, that's fine. Just click tell us what it is in this description. Either way, put that in. So if we say we are going to get 30 passenger electric buses, let's say they cost 300,000 and we're getting 5 of them. That'll calculate into that and show you the total cost of that. Down here, the type of electric plugins. We're not so interested in the transformer information or the pads. We just need to know what kind of charger you're purchasing. It just helps us understand the feasibility of the project. Probably a direct current fast charger for a school bus. And what if we're saying EG as an example, company EG Inc. 100 kilowatt chargers. And let's say those cost $60,000. That's probably a low estimate, but and we're getting 2 of them to serve the 5 buses. That'll all calculate in. Down here in module 3 for other costs, you'll show us just other things that are part of the project. There are some pre-written in here. Those are just examples. If those don't apply to you, you can delete them or you can change them. And maybe that's exactly how you would phrase it. That's fine too. Let's just put a number in just for the sake of putting something in. Up here, it will auto-calculate where everything is. And finally, in this last thing here, we ask you to describe the match. So if it is from you, we'll say town of example, from the capital reserves. This right here will tell you what the required match would be for this. And you could include that there. And this is just a worksheet to give us the information. You'll be able to explain in more detail on the project narrative. And on the other one, which we'll just open just to show you what that looks like eventually. There we go. The fleet description worksheet will show all of these different tabs at the bottom, which are for the different kinds of things this project can fund as far as unit replacements. We just want you to include this information. This will help us understand the effectiveness of the project. So put in the VIN. Anything that has like this green fill either has a drop down or is going to be checking to make sure that your input was something that's allowed. So for instance, if we look at freight switchers, as you'll recall, one of the requirements is that it uses at least 1,000 hours a year. And so you can enter in that number yourself. But if I put a low number like 500, it will tell you that didn't work. Anyway, go ahead and you'll fill out this with however many you have. If you have more buses, if you're proposing more than what is there, go ahead and just add your own lines as you would on an Excel sheet. We kept this pretty much unlocked, so go ahead and do what you need to do. So that is what we'll look for. We need these documents, these things. Please don't hesitate to ask us questions about documents if there's a problem. We're here for that. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk a little bit about this program and how it is different and similar to the New Hampshire Clean Diesel program. You may have heard of the Clean Diesel program before. We've been running it for years. Both programs exist to reduce diesel emissions mainly through replacement of diesel units. There is some overlap, but they don't perfectly overlap, nor are they perfectly exclusive. The New Hampshire Clean Diesel program is funded through EPA's Diesel Emission Reduction Act. So we call it DERA sometimes. And again, Granite State Clean Fleets, which let's just call it GSCF, just because we're going to be comparing things enough, and I'm going to be saying this too many times, is funded through Volkswagen. So this has EPA restrictions, this has Volkswagen restrictions. And they're also both open right now. So that's why we should probably talk about them where they parallel and diverge. I also will just say about a year ago, we recorded a whole webinar just on DERA. So if you want to get more into the details on that, that's on the Clean Diesel webpage. There we go. So the biggest difference is that DERA is available to pretty much any entity operating fleets in New Hampshire, including businesses and state or local governments, whereas Granite State Clean Fleets is only open to local government entities. Both programs can replace old diesels with new diesels. But if you want to go from diesel to EV, there is a difference. Granite State Clean Fleets can only replace old diesels, but DERA can actually electrify diesels no matter how old they are. And again, remember how I said freight switchers can only be eligible for Granite State Clean Fleets if they operate 1,000 hours per year. That sort of usage requirement applies to all units under DERA at different rates. DERA requires that like trucks operate 7,000 miles a year. I think like loader or another engine like that is I think 500 hours, stuff like that. And there's really only that one restriction for clean fleets is for freight switchers. That said, DERA has many more options for diesel emission activities and has historically reoccurred every year. On the other hand, generally Granite State Clean Fleets has higher funding percentages for comparable projects and can even fund the infrastructure upgrades required for EVs. The last difference, again, like I said, DERA has reoccurred every year. For Granite State Clean Fleets, this is the money. Once it's gone, we're not expecting any more funds for this program. So those are like the overview of the differences. I'm going to get a little bit more into the details of the differences because again, I want anyone watching this to be able to make an informed decision as to which program they apply to. The next slide's a little busy, so I apologize, but bear with me as I explain it. Okay, so side by side, you can see some of the program differences. If it's blacked out on one of them, it means it is not present for that program, but it was present for the other one. So you can see generally DERA has more options. It can serve businesses. You can do a replacement with propane or natural gas. But generally most replacement projects, if you see like 25% to 50%, whereas Granite State Clean Fleets is like 80 to 95%. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. We're not going to go over every single piece on here. This will be there later if you want to look at it. I just want to highlight one other major difference between the two projects, which is the eligible units. So real quick, let's talk about which units can be funded under DERA versus which can be funded under Granite State Clean Fleets, which will also be a bit of a refresher for what units can be eligible under GSCF. Under DERA, buses, Class 5 to 8 shuttle or transit buses, and Type A, B, C, and D school buses are eligible. Under GSCF, any bus of Class 4 to 8. Trucks are the same under DERA, Class 5 to 8. Under GSCF, Class 4 to 8. As for marine engines, DERA can fund replacement of ferries, tugboats, fishing boats, and generally other marine vessels. But GSCF can only fund ferries and tugboats, not fishing boats, not other stuff. Similarly, for locomotives, DERA can fund freight switchers, passenger locomotives, line haul locomotives, but Granite State Clean Fleets can only fund freight switchers, and so not line haul, not passenger. I'm actually going to skip non-road equipment for a second, just jump down to off-board idle reduction technology. They can both fund marine shore power, but DERA can also fund locomotive shore power and can also do truck stop electrification for like long haul truckers. Back up to non-road equipment. I want to draw your attention to the fact that Granite State Clean Fleets cannot fund construction equipment, but DERA can. So if you want to replace a loader or a backhoe or a grader or a bulldozer, that can go under DERA, but not GSCF. Otherwise, though, they can both cover cargo handling, airport, ground support, and forklifts. DERA can also do mining and agriculture and energy production as well. Okay, I know that was a lot. We designed both of these programs to be broad because we often get calls about what about this diesel unit that we never even thought of before. That said, most projects we get are pretty standard: buses, trucks, construction equipment, stuff like that. So let me just show one more slide comparing the two programs, but we're only going to look at some of the more common projects. Here are some common grant projects. If your project's not on here, it doesn't mean it's not eligible. It's just that these are like some of our most popular examples. Example 1, let's say you want to replace an old diesel plow truck with a new diesel plow truck. So diesel for diesel. If the truck runs at least 7,000 miles per year, it can qualify for 25% grant funding under DERA. Or under Granite State Clean Fleets, no matter how many miles it travels, the truck can qualify for 80% funding. Example 2. You want to replace 5 old diesel school buses with electric school buses, diesel for EV. Like the truck, in order to qualify for DERA funds, each bus needs to run 7,000 miles per year, with the caveat for school buses that if it ran 7,000 miles per year during the calendar year before the pandemic, that can count too. DERA can fund up to 45% of an EV project like that, including the cost of the chargers. Or under Granite State Clean Fleets, the project can qualify for up to 95% funding, including the chargers and the EV utility infrastructure. In example 3, you want to replace a relatively new diesel garbage truck with an EV. So again, diesel for EV. Once again, under DERA, the truck must have run 7,000 miles per year, and DERA can fund 45% of the cost, including the charger. This does not, however, qualify for Granite State Clean Fleets because the truck is too new. In example 4, if you wanted to replace an old diesel wheeled loader with a new diesel loader, if the loader operates at least 500 hours per year, DERA can fund 25% of the project cost, but it's not eligible for Granite State Clean Fleets because that's just not one of the types of units that this program can cover. In our last example, if you had 2 old Class 4 shuttle buses that you wanted to replace with electric buses, that's a diesel for EV project. Because they're Class 4, they don't qualify under DERA, but they can qualify under Granite State Clean Fleets. And Granite State Clean Fleets can fund 95% of the project costs, including the chargers and the infrastructure. I'm hoping these examples cover the majority of hypothetical projects, but I fully expect and welcome any inquiries about other project ideas or unit types. You can review the RFP about what is an eligible unit. And I know this can all be confusing, but let's now talk about resources and next steps. First off, if you're looking at doing an electrification project, contact your utility as soon as possible to schedule a site eval and talk about what needs to be done. In the RFP, I've actually listed the appropriate contact person for each of New Hampshire's major electric utilities. They know about this program. They're ready for your questions. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Granite State Clean Cities Coalition. GSCCC is a great resource for finding alternative fuel and electric vehicle information, data, workshops, meetings, and even live demos of new technology. And they can help you figure out what your fleet might need. Here at NHDES, we also can help you determine what's eligible and what's out there for replacements. We can provide technical support on accessing the proposal and documents, and we can talk about DERA projects we've seen in the past. We cannot tell you whether or not you'll be selected or anything like that, but we can help you with technical concerns. I do recommend submitting your questions early. Remember, the grant closes on October 13th. Do not, please, do not submit your questions on October 12th expecting a response in time. Give us some time to give you your answer so we can get you the right answers. If it's October 12th and you need to send us the question, I'm sure you will, but ideally send it with some time in advance. And here's our contact information. If you have a general question, drop an email to our mobile sources inbox. We will have the best person respond to it. My contact information is there as well. Like I said, I wrote this RFP. I'm pretty familiar with it. If you have questions about that, let me know. If you're hoping to connect with the Granite State Clean Cities Coalition for resources or data, you can reach out to John. His contact information is here as well. And I also include Jessica Wilcox, our supervisor. She has been in all of these roles actually, and has a wealth of knowledge. So she's actually on the line with us too. And that brings me to questions. Hey, Jessica.
Great job, Ricky. Thanks so much. It's a lot of great information there. We'll give folks a moment to think. I know that usually, what does it take, 10 or 20 seconds, Ricky, for folks to come up with questions. So please feel free to enter your question in the chat or to raise your hand. But in the interim, we do have a couple questions that were posed that we'll get started with. So Ricky, the Granite State Clean Fleets program, you mentioned trucks Class 4 to Class 8 are eligible. Would a fire engine fall into this category?
A fire engine could potentially fall into this category, but we would need to actually review it. That is a specific, because it's a specific kind of truck, the The Volkswagen Mitigation Trust states that the trucks need to be hauling something. And the argument that they are hauling water from place to place could be made. So we would just have to double check. However, barring that classification, yes. If they can qualify as a freight hauling truck, and we'll have to investigate the exact specifics on that. If they can, then yes.
So one of the priorities of the program, environmental justice. How can applicants determine if their project benefits an EJ community?
That's a great question. So environmental justice is a term that's actually been around since the 90s. The concept has really picked up a lot of steam recently, and so there's a lot of new and burgeoning resources for this. I recommend using an EJ tool, for instance, the EJ screen, and it's just EJ, the letters, and then the word screen, like a monitor that you're looking at or to screen somebody for something. EJ screen will let you look at a map and determine what criteria your communities fall into for environmental justice and to what degree. You can use the EJ screen tool to show whether or not part of your town has a high concentration of low income housing, or if they receive a disproportionate amount of air pollution from diesel engines. That'd be how you might start identifying if you have such a community in your municipality. From there, it's always a good idea to engage with those community leaders, people who are most involved with the community, especially when we're talking about health concerns when it comes to pollution and air emissions. Engaging with them is a great way to make sure that that's benefiting them, and thinking about if you have a vehicle that is operating frequently in those areas, how would replacing that benefit the people who live near it? Describing that kind of thing in the application doesn't, again, you don't need to be writing us a novel. You can give us some very basic information and explain to us why you feel this is qualifying for that. We'll also be doing our diligence to look at the EJ screen as well and find those areas that that will have the greatest impact on air quality.
Thank you, Rick. And I did put a link in the chat to the EPA webpage, which has the access to that EJ screen tool. So if folks want to access that, feel free to use that link. All right, so another question that came through, can EVSE, so EV charging infrastructure, be applied for independent of the vehicle, or is it tied to vehicle projects?
It is tied to vehicle projects. Any EVSC that is funded under this program must be, strictly speaking, required and necessary for an EV that the program is also funding. So if you are applying for electric school buses, the charger, and the infrastructure associated with it must be what is required for that bus. So if you're getting 2 buses and you want 3 chargers, we probably aren't going to fund the 3rd charger, right? 2 buses, 2 chargers, that's pretty justifiable, but the 3rd one, not so much. Now, once those are in the ground, if you wanted to also charge let's say, again, we're talking about this example of it's a school, you've put 2 electric school buses in, you have 2 pedestals. If somebody wanted to charge off of those, that's going to be up to you to manage. If they wanted to use that for the personal vehicle, or for if the school has a Ford Lightning that it uses for maintenance or something like that, that they wanted to charge, that would be up to you to manage that. We're not paying for operation or maintenance, so what you do with the electricity is up to you as well. But the pedestals and anything upgrading the infrastructure must be specifically required for the EV that is funded through the program.
Great, and that applies to the clean diesel program as well.
Yes, the clean diesel program, the charger that you would apply for would be part of the cost of the EV that you're purchasing.
And those are usually 1-to-1. So if you're replacing 1 vehicle, 1 charger versus 5 vehicles, 5 charging stations.
And you probably don't need 1-to-1 on every single project type. There may be a certain project that you have where you don't need to have the thing charged constantly. You know that you can manage your charging and have 3 chargers serve 5 buses or something like that. And that could just cut down on your cost, and that's fine too. The maximum is 1-to-1 though.
Very good. Thank you, Ricky. A question about utility make-ready. Can any make-ready utility cost for upgrades be counted towards the match?
You can count it towards the match if you'd like. Well, let me rephrase that. The grant will fund 95% of the cost of the EV plus the charger plus the infrastructure upgrades required for that. So 5% of those costs will be part of the match. If you would like to overmatch and pay for more of the utility side upgrades yourself or have your partners pay for it, or whoever you partner with for it if they do, that's completely acceptable, yes. If there's ineligible costs, which as far as when it comes to breaking ground and installing infrastructure and things like that, those are not ineligible, those are eligible costs. But other ineligible costs won't count towards the match. And actually, I'll just rewind a little bit to show that slide again. So again, everything on the left is where we do the 95 from us, 5% match. Everything on the right is just 100% from you. Hope that clears it up. If not, drop a follow-up question. We'll continue.
Great. So Ricky, we covered a lot of different types of eligible projects with this program. Question came through about diesel generators for off-grid power. Are those eligible under the Granite State Clean Fleets program or the DERA program?
So for DERA, we'll do the comparison slide. For DERA, energy production could be considered eligible if you have, for instance, an old diesel engine that you wanted to, an old diesel generator you wanted to replace with a new diesel generator. That could theoretically be eligible under clean diesel or DERA. But under Granite State Clean Fleets, there is not a specific category for that. I guess if it's airport ground support equipment specifically, like if it's a generator for, powering an airplane that comes to land and needs to get its instruments checked while it's not idling, potentially. But otherwise, no. If it's just a stationary generator for like a facility, no, that would not qualify under Granite State Clean Fleets program. It could qualify under DERA though.
Very good. Thank you, Ricky. Talking about, in particular, dump trucks. Would this program, Granite State Clean Fleets, replace just the cab and chassis or the entire truck and equipment?
Anything necessary for that truck to do the job that the old truck did is considered eligible. So if it has a dump body bucket, it has a sander on the back, it's got a plow on the front, anything like that, if the old one had that, and then the new one should have that too, and that will be eligible. If the old one doesn't have those things or doesn't need those things, then no, we're not going to pay for that on the new one. It's strictly for replacement. The idea should not be to upgrade, should not be adding to your fleet. It should just be increasing the potential of the fleet you already have. So if it already had it, yes. And if it needs it, yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Ricky. So there was a question in the chat about the slide deck being shared. I did respond to that in the chat and said we're planning on posting the PowerPoint presentation as a PDF to the DES Volkswagen Trust webpage. So there's a link to that webpage there as well. One thing we want to know is that with the DERA program, Ricky had mentioned that there were certain, minimum mileage requirements that came into play. And although the Granite State Clean Fleets program doesn't require those, because these are competitive programs, a project where a vehicle may be driven less may be less competitive overall. So in considering that, one way to maybe offset a project that you feel might not be as competitive is to perhaps overmatch or to contribute a larger percentage or ask for a lower percentage of the entire cost. So just things to keep in mind. These are competitive programs. So I don't see any more questions. Oh, another question just came through. Can multiple towns apply and pool their equipment mileage in order to meet mileage requirements? And I'm assuming, Tad, that would be related to the New Hampshire Clean Diesel program because Granite State Clean Fleets doesn't have a mileage requirement, but
except for freight switching locomotives. So yes, if you are applying for Granite State Clean Fleets and you want to pool funds, or if you want to, if you have a vehicle that is shared between towns and you want to replace that vehicle and it would serve multiple towns, absolutely acceptable, yes. Under the Clean Diesel program, which does have mileage requirements, let me just create a hypothetical example. If you have a plow truck that is really old and you only use it on every other snowstorm. You know what? Let me give a different example. Let's say you have a school bus. It's pretty old. It runs Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And you have another school bus, also pretty old, and it runs Tuesday and Thursday, because that way you can kind of eke out more time with these buses, right? You could replace both of them with one school bus that runs Monday through Friday. And by doing that, if both school buses together meet that 7,000 mile restriction or 7,000 mile minimum, then that counts as meeting that requirement. So if you are looking to replace something that doesn't meet that 7,000 mile requirement for a school bus, but you have two school buses which are both eligible and combined meet 7,000, you can replace both of them with one. Again, Granite State Clean Fleets, we do not have that requirement except for freight switcher locomotives. And if you have two towns have two freight switcher locomotives that they would like to replace with one freight switcher locomotive to reach that 1,000 hours, yes, that's acceptable.
Thank you for that clarification, Ricky. So question about the utility side of things for an electric vehicle project per se. The question is, will the cost of the utility system impact study for these proposed EV charging installations be an eligible cost or be covered by the program?
So I'm assuming this is like the pre-project evaluation. You have the utility come out and take a look at everything, or maybe they just take a look at through photographs and know where the lines are. No, that will not be an eligible project cost. However, talk to your utilities. Several of the utilities have indicated that they will not be charging municipalities for this if they do this kind of thing. So you might not have any costs there at all. If there are, that is ineligible because it will happen before governor and council. Before it's approved, rather, by the governor and council. If this is something that happens down the line during site work, site work to install the infrastructure, maybe you hit a snag, maybe a tree comes down, you need to do a redo of your evaluation. That would be, because that would be, if it's after approval, that would be part of the installation phase.
Great. New question about leasing. Would a lease purchase qualify? And I think as we're answering these two, we have talked about two different programs, so maybe touching on relevance for each of those programs.
Yeah, so under the clean diesel program, we will allow a lease to purchase structure so long as it follows the following. The program will not reimburse the cost of the lease. So as far as like the fees go, any fees, anything that is not the actual cost of purchasing the vehicle will not be qualified. It will not qualify. If you do this, you need to have that lease paid for, and you need to purchase that before the grant contract is finished. And for Deere and New Hampshire Clean Diesel, that's usually within a year or two. So yes, theoretically, but it is not as it's not as simple as just paying for the lease, because we will not pay for the lease fees. We also will not reimburse the cost as you go for the lease. It'll be when you purchase it, we will reimburse. For Granite State Clean Fleets, it's a much cleaner answer. No, we are not doing lease to own under Granite State Clean Fleets. We are hoping that the fact that we're funding 80% to 95% of the cost will make this more accessible, and so that you won't need to lease. But if you do, that is not going to be something we're going to do under Granite State Clean Fleets.
Great, thank you, Ricky, for that clarification. So a question about kind of the timeline. When would awards be released? When would funding need to be spent by? What is the period of performance that we're looking at for this program?
So proposals are due October 13th. I'd say give us, I'm not going to, there's some date in the RFP as to how long we think it'll take. It might take us up to 6 weeks to make a decision. I hope it doesn't, but hopefully before the holidays, hopefully before Thanksgiving even, sometime in November, we'll have a decision as to which projects we would select. At that point, we would send the emails out that say, we've selected your project. We acknowledge it's been a few weeks. Is everything still good? Are you still going to be interested in pursuing this? And from there, we'll start okay, here's what we need for the contract. Here's what we need for you to provide us as far as certificates for authority and stuff like that. Once that all goes through, and again, there's a bit of there's some time that it takes for this to be approved internally and through the governor and council process. Once you have your start date and we say go ahead and do your thing, the timeline on that's going to be a little bit dependent on negotiation. We don't have as hard a strict deadline as we do for DERA when it comes to this program, so we can give you some more time if you think it's going to take a couple of years to get everything set up. That's probably going to be fine. So I can't give you a straight answer as to every single contract what the end date will be, but I can say that we can work with you and figure out what will work best. Part of your project proposal will be showing us what timeline you think will be feasible for you. And we would love to see an honest answer there. Don't give us the shortest possible timeline. One, because we're going to look at that and say, how feasible is that really? And two, we want to make sure you have the time to actually affect these changes. So there isn't a clear answer on that because everyone's going to be a little different. If you're just looking for how long this might take in the past, we've seen usually that for a replacement of something like a plow truck or something that's common, it might take a year with the supply chain delays, hopefully less, maybe 2 years if it's a really bad supply chain delay or your particular vehicle dealer is out of stock. For things that are rarer, it can take an additional year if you have to have it custom built. And for electric units, that's really going to be information we're going to love to see because it's, as you've probably heard a million times, the electric vehicle industry is changing very rapidly. We had some extreme supply chain delays a few years ago. Now we're seeing things pick back up. We're seeing the industry starting faster again. So we don't quite know exactly how long it would take you to get those yet, but we're happy to work with you.
Well, and that's kind of like ending on a good note. We're happy to work with you. We hope that you're going to reach out with interesting projects and plan to apply for either or both of these programs. And we look forward to hearing from you. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Ricky, any final words or comments before we close up?
Yeah, I honestly, I'm just really excited about this program, being able to fund a high percentage of the projects, helping out our municipalities and school districts and local transit agencies throughout the state. It's just exciting. And, we had someone emailed me a question asking, are there any heavy duty electric vehicles that we can, owners in New Hampshire? And we don't have as many as we should, and we'd love to see that change. We're not saying that we're not going to look at your diesel for diesel projects. We're very excited about those as well. Those are going to be great projects. So just generally, I'm just excited. Please reach out to us. Our contact information is there. You can find it all on the website. It's all on the RFP. And otherwise, hope you all enjoy your long weekend, maybe your holiday weekend if you have one. At least your weekend at the very least, right? Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming. Really, really appreciate your time. Have fun.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.